this computer. Okay. Okay. Oh, you got enough time. Good morning, everyone in Facebook world. You're tuning into Community Conversations. We're going to get started on air in just a moment. My special guest today is Dr. William Sam Palmer from, well, not Arkansas State, but NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine on the campus of Arkansas State University. I'm going to say that 3 times. That's okay. We have about 30 seconds before we go on air. So I can't wait to get into this conversation. It's all about nutrition. We're all trying to find a happy place and find get to our optimal health. And so I'm looking forward to the tips and information you have to share with us on today. Okay. All right, here we go. Good morning, everyone, and happy Wednesday to you. You're tuned in to Community Conversations on KLEK 102.5 FM. I'm your host, Kobila Jones, and my special guest today is Dr. William or Sam Palmer from NYIT, the College of Osteopathic Medicine on the campus of Arkansas State University. Today, we're going to be talking all about nutrition. I know we're in the middle of this pandemic and everyone's having life issues and no one wants to talk about diet and eating right and this, that, or whatever. But unfortunately, it's necessary and we have to maintain uh, optimal health, a balance. We have to eat a balanced diet. And diet, I know sometimes is a bad word, but we're definitely going to get into that. But first, I want to give you a little intro about Dr. Palmer. Okay, Dr. Palmer attended A-State for undergrad and medical school at UAMS. Dr. Palmer is board certified in family medicine and has maintained a family practice for the past 10 years. For 3 years, he was medical director of a local HMR weight loss program, and he has also sat on a diabetic advisory board. While a full time faculty member, he continues to pursue interest in weight loss and diabetes. And so, wow. So you are the perfect person to talk about this today. So thank you for giving us your time on today. So let's get started. What is nutrition? When we hear the word nutrition, you're like, what is nutrition?
I mean, nutrition is really kind of what you eat, and hopefully it's healthy nutrition. I mean, if you want to look at proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and it's, what gives us our energy for our daily functioning.
Okay. Alrighty. And so then we hear the words diet. People like change your diet. You should eat this type of diet, just diet. What does that mean?
So this comes up a lot for me, and there's a lot of different ways I kind of look at it. And I'll say that the first thing of it is that when people tell me I'm on a diet, usually my initial bias, my initial thought means that you're not eating something that you could otherwise be eating. Okay.
Okay.
You can get into fad diets or whatever. So most of the time I try to flip the table on people when they say, hey, I want to diet or I'm on a diet. And I would say, well, I would like to change the word of our definition of diet and say diet means what I'm eating. And I would like to promote a healthy diet.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm a little bit silly with that. And I'll say, well, if you're eating cardboard, then your diet is cardboard. Obviously, we should not eat cardboard. But, I mean, Cheetos and Dr. Pepper is a diet. But
Oh,
we should eat, right. It's not a very nutritional diet. There's no
no.
value in it other than sugar. And so I want to promote a healthy diet.
Okay. So let's get into pros, cons, facts, and myths. Okay. So one of the biggest crazes, that's the way to say it, keto. Keto, there's vegan or slash plant-based, which I am currently transitioning to. And that's for a whole nother reason. But so keto, and then there's the low carb. The Atkins was really popular at one time, and there's so many varieties. So let's talk about the pros and cons of limiting certain things for your body.
Um, One of those things when I look at my approach of how people are doing certain diets, and it kind of goes back to what I was kind of referencing a second ago. It was like when you use a diet, promoting a healthy diet. Now, there's different diets out there. So there's diets for weight loss, there's diets for cardiovascular risk. Okay. And so you can look at, well, what's your goal from this diet? And so when we're
Okay.
looking at healthy nutrition, do I want to lose a lot of weight fast? And definitely when you look at like something like keto can help you lose a lot of weight fast. Okay. So if you're saying, hey, I'm engaged and I bought my wedding dress a year ago and I've gained a few pounds because of stress getting ready to get married, and I need to lose 5 to 10 pounds to get into the wedding dress, keto will work for you. Okay.
Okay.
Is it a healthy diet? I would argue no.
Okay.
I don't believe it's sustainable. I think that there's definitely some concerns and some risks for doing it long term. And I'm very cautious with it. I think that sometimes when I talk to people about when they say I'm doing keto, oftentimes they're not really exactly doing keto, and they tend to
Okay.
be doing low carbohydrate. And so it becomes really understanding what exactly is the person doing, how are they defining keto, and trying to look at, what are your energy needs, what are your goals, what is your time frame? Is this something that we're looking for long-term health modification, or is this like a short-term, I need to lose 5 to 10 pounds before I go on vacation to the beach?
Okay. I want to ask this. I was thinking about this when you were talking about, losing weight quickly and changing. Um, there are some people that believe that, okay, okay, no. Say you eaten Cheetos, you drink Cokes, you've eaten the steak, like you've done this, you eat some vegetables here and there, then all of a sudden you want to, it's like you hit this wall and say, I'm gonna stop cold turkey and start doing this. So should you transition and condition your body and your system to accept this new way of eating, or can you go cold turkey?
Um, you know, I, the hardest thing about changing is actually changing. Okay. So some people are very successful at, I'm going to completely change. And when you look at your examples of that, I mean, I mentioned I use the Coke and Cheetos or Dr. Pepper and Cheetos as a lot of a counter for people when they're like, how do I lose weight? I'm like, well, you can lose weight eating Cheetos and Dr. Pepper because it's really only calories that matter. And if you're trying to cut back calories, well, it says on the package, on the bottle and the bag of Cheetos, how many calories are in that. And so
Okay.
as a functioning organism, we need certain amount of calories to maintain our body weight. Now, definitely there's physical activity and amount of how well your metabolism is working. And so those can counter to it, but there's no nutritional value in that. You'll find that some people, when they go from converting from eating sweets all the time, that sweet urge, I mean, it works in your endocrine system and your GI system and the gut, and it also feeds back to your brain. And so when you think about, I'm just going to say, like, your mother's favorite dessert, apple pie or something, or cake or something that you can think back, it makes you smile, and you're sitting there thinking, I can almost taste it. Okay. And so that's what sugar does, is that you get positive reinforcement from eating those foods. And so some people, when they try to, like, I'm just not going to eat Oreos, but then they eat cheesecake, or they'll really want some other sweets. And so some people are successful by going cold turkey on sugars altogether.
Okay.
Um, and they just have to do it. And there's data out there that kind of supports that. And there's definitely diet plans that have come up. It says, yes, some people, you have to remove the sugars altogether, the added sweeteners, because otherwise they will crave it. And
Okay.
then that gets into artificial sweeteners as well, because that will still stimulate that urge and that desire to have sweetness. And so some people they can definitely lose weight when they're substituting that positive reinforcement, but um, some people are not as successful, and that's like a pitfall that I look out for. I'm like, okay, well, what? how are you handling this urge of
Okay.
I need.
Okay. We have a few questions. Shout outs in the live feed. I want to say good morning to Linda Johnson Frazier. Says good morning, Kelly K and Dr. Palmer. Derek Coleman says good morning. And he brought up one question that I do want to get to about some unhealthy habits that and some eating disorders that people may encounter. But he does ask a question. What um is there a diet or remedy to get rid of fluid in your body? So I don't want to call it a trend. um there are diets or things you can do to get rid of inflammation, which we know leads to a lot of
Mhm.
other health issues. And so there's a lot of talk about, and I have done some research because I have lymphedema, so I've done, what that entails. So
Right.
there's, the turmeric, there's ginger, there's all of these. There's another wave. Okay, we talked about keto. There's another wave of holistic
Mhm.
dieting that leads to the plant-based slash vegan. And there's a lot of controversy around vegan, but people that are wholehearted. Anyway, we're gonna say plant-based for lack of a better word.
Okay.
Plant-based. So it's a whole other movement. So let's talk about reducing fluid. Is there again, I don't want to say diet, but a regimen?
Well, to answer that question, it can be complicated because people's bodies, their what they bring to the table as far as other conditions, health conditions, diagnosis, can definitely interfere with that. In general, from a nutritional side of things, is that we live in a very salty world, and that there is so much excess sodium in our diet, and we're just not really aware of that. And one of the things that I know I realized in my personal journey years ago when I lost weight, I had removed a lot of things from my diet, and then um, I got catered this like really bland looking meal, and I was like, "Oh, I can eat this. This is bland, and this must be healthy." And I ate this really bland white piece of chicken that didn't have any color or any sauce or anything else on it. It was just a pure grilled piece of chicken, and I remember sticking it in my mouth. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is so delicious. And I realized that this bland piece of chicken was just coated in salt. And like,
Oh,
and after watching like cooking shows and watching techniques of how chefs make food, I mean, they brine our chickens in salt water and it just soaks up the salt. And it just makes it so much tasty. And so there's sometimes like the simplest, even the blandest looking food that tastes so good is just soaked in salt. And you can just see like through packaging, and unless it's fresh or fresh frozen, it most likely has excess amounts of salt. And I mean, I love certain products that like some of these Cajun rices and things that you can buy in the little package, and you just boil it in water. But if you ever look at the amount of sodium that's on there, it's like huge. It's like it's 50% of your daily value of recommended salt. And so um, salt plays a role in water retention, and it comes back to properties of water. And so I can go eat at certain restaurants and discover, wow, I'm just thirsty all day after it because I may have chose what I thought was a healthy meal.
hmm.
Oh, I ate broccoli, but it was also covered in salt. And so we as a culture, as I guess as people, we're really being pulled back and forth from that salt urge. And so from an answer from fluid, I would say that a lot of times it's a salt component.
Okay. And he also says that he has gout. So, and I'm not familiar with the, details of that condition.
Yeah, there's just a specific diet there that you can follow for gout that can help with that. That's associated with that. And so for my patients, instead of me just rattling off a list in the clinic and telling them, "Hey, remember this," because I realize that they're probably not going to remember a list that I give them. We live in a world of technology. Here we are. There's just lists you can find from institutions that are reliable, and they'll just give you a list of eat this and not that. So.
Okay. All right. I want to say good morning to Mrs. Clarice Scales. Thank you for checking in. And I want to ask you this before we move on. Okay, so I saw an ad on YouTube. It says basically salads won't help you lose. There are some people who feel, well, if I eat salads, if I eat fruit, if I eat, you know, again, going back to the plant, let's talk about plant based. We
Okay.
have about 6 minutes in this segment. So we touched on keto, and we're going to get into some other things, but let's talk about the plant based movement.
Okay.
And then what I'm learning, and there are still a lot of processed foods that are plant based. They
Okay.
have a lot of ingredients, and again, going back to that sodium and sugar and this, that, and whatever. So, let's talk about that.
Okay. So we live in a complex world. Our diets are very complex. And if we were to look at what's considered to be a healthy diet, it's mostly a plant-based diet.
Okay.
Okay. Um, for me personally, one of the things that I personally struggle getting away from going full vegan is because I have teeth that are meant for chewing meat. There are certain vitamins that we only get from eating animal products, and so I personally love meat. Um, and one of during my personal road, it's a big challenge to realize, hey, I can have a meal without meat in it. Okay. And that was a huge step for me when I realized, wow, I don't have to have meat at every meal. Um, but when we look at that, if you look at a lot of the literature and everything right now and what's considered healthy diets, most of them are plant based. And
Okay.
even when you start comparing some of them, I mean, if you're looking at like paleo, if you're looking at the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, the biggest difference from the paleo and like say the Mediterranean diet is paleo lacks whole grains, and there's a lot of nutritional value in that fiber that's found in whole grains. And even if you
Okay.
look at the developmental world, um, fiber seems to be the currently one of the missing links in our American diet right now.
Okay. And that can lead to a lot of gut issues. Um, yeah, we're just going to leave
Yes, it's a
that.
very complex. It's a very complex answer, and I love talking about it. It's whenever you're ready for that discussion, we can dive into that too as well.
Okay. We talked about diets, but then there are times that people feel like, well, I can drink this, that, and whatever. And so oftentimes we get a lot of our calories from the things we drink and we don't realize it.
Right.
So let's touch on being mindful about what you drink.
Sure. So you can look at like added sweeteners and for me, it took me a few years to get onto the train of it's added sugars. It's not necessarily the type of sugar, it's added sugars. And
Okay.
that's really of our problem. Especially you can look at um, um, sodas, sweet tea. We're in the South. Those are big components. Sometimes people may not be counting their alcohol as sugars, but it does technically. It's not an added sugar, but those do have calories in it. And so calories can be sneaky, and they can be in things in a lot of different places that people don't realize. Um, I was appalled, when we had McAllister's here. I was really I loved McAllister's, and when I was younger, I used to drink the sweet tea, and then I discovered how much sugar they put in their sweet tea, and it's good for a reason. And so
I, I
I
think
still love McAllister's.
McAllister's, Chick-fil-A, Backyard Burger. Like I'm a like I am Southern to my soul. So tea is my staple.
Right.
Now I have switched to using raw sugar when I do have
Okay.
sugar or honey, even though honey is an animal byproduct. So I'm trying to transition into either agave or some other
Okay.
plant based. I know there's stevia, some things. So anyway, I'm like I said, I'm transitioning, and so I'm learning slowly,
Right.
but I'm learning.
And then I think when you look at that, I mean, you have to look at individual personal goals and then your expectations. There's a wide range of that, and sometimes people aren't going to fit in the same mold as the next person. So
And then since you touched on vegan, we've touched on a little bit. What is the difference, or is there a difference in plant based and vegan? I know some people like to argue, well, if you're vegan, that's a whole lifestyle. But let's talk about the vegan diet. um, we're going to continue this. We're going to go off air in a minute, but we'll continue this on Facebook. So those listen on air, if you want to jump on Facebook, because I want to get this, get an answer in for this, because we want to move on to, let's look at your biological factors, environmental factors, you know, what is an ideal? And I know ideal for everybody is not the same, but some ideals for height and weight, your height and body shape, and also eating disorders that people can fall prey to. So we'll get into that on the other side of the break. But I do want to finish this about the vegan, kind of break that down. But we're going to go take a quick break. You're tuned in to Community Conversations on KLEK 102.5 FM. If you have any questions, please drop them in our Facebook Live feed and we'll get them asked and hopefully answered on air. So please stay tuned and we'll be right back. Okay, I'm sorry. So I want to go ahead and get your answer in for when it comes to a vegan diet.
So you want to start that when we come back?
Well, we have about 4 or 5 minutes, so if you can, at least 4 minutes. So if you want
So
to
let
go
me go
ahead
ahead and
and
say now.
yes.
Okay. So the differences between plant diet and vegan diet. So there's historically, people would hear vegetarian diet, and
Mhm.
vegetarian
Oh, I forgot
was
the
assumed
vegetarian.
that they weren't eating meat. But what happens is when you get to vegan, then you're basically not eating animal products.
Okay.
And so vegetarians will still eat cheese and milk and dairy sometimes, and you can find we live in a world where everyone has a different definition for things, and
Yeah.
individually they may not necessarily be wrong, but without communication, we don't realize, oh, this is what you mean. And so, uh, for me, plant-based diet, vegetarian and vegan, for vegetarian, I hear, okay, I'm probably still eating dairy, but I'm not eating meat specifically, versus vegan, I'm not eating any kind of animal products. Plant-based diet means that it's based on plants, but you still eat animal products. So you can eat meat and cheese and stuff, but you're mostly eating plants. Um,
Okay. Now
and that would be the way I'd interpret it, but versus does that mean the way that someone uses those words? It may not be that way.
all right. And then there's also another, I'm not gonna call it a trend, a lifestyle, diet lifestyle, which is the raw. There are some people who they may do a raw uh diet for a time period again. One, is it really now I know there are people who live by this and they juice and they eat raw. That's their way of life and they seem to do well. But is it optimal, like for overall health?
Um, Again, that comes back to your personal goals and as far as what you're doing. Um, if I was to probably pinnacle a diet, it would be basically fresh or fresh frozen, following
Okay.
the Mediterranean diet. But we don't live in the Mediterranean,
No.
so getting something that's fresh and fresh frozen in the Mediterranean, well, I mean, yes, I mean we don't have an ocean in our backyard. So when we look at like trends for that, I mean, sometimes people have to eat easily processed foods. We live in a busy lifestyle. Sometimes our packages have to be pre-cooked or in a box or something to help us, you know, not spend 2 hours in the kitchen when we come home from work, or we don't have 2 hours and we have to catch something easy. So if I was to pinnacle, fresh or fresh frozen would be the value. Now, when we look at dietary trends across the world, one of the problems, I referenced this earlier, is that there are some studies that compared cardiovascular disease in other countries compared to industrialized nations such as America. And
Okay.
the main difference of that was the lack of whole grains. And so
Wait. We have
so
one
the
minute.
so when we look at whole grains, that's the fiber. And when we remove and we process things, so if we process flour and we take out the grain, and make it in a smooth little powder that we can now make smooth bread or pastries with, we lose the fiber and the whole grain of it.
Oh,
Um, when we juice a orange and all these things, we remove the fiber out of the plant. And so, yes, we may get the liquids, we may get some of the vitamins. We also get a lot of sugar, but we don't get the fiber. And a lot of the data shows that that fiber is what balances our body. It's a complex nature because it's not fiber is not absorbed through the colon, and so there is a symbiotic relationship there. Um, but that fiber helps balance that sugar surge. And so when
oh.
we remove the fiber by processing, then that's where we have a problem.
Alrighty. Welcome back to Community Conversations on KLEK 102.5 FM. Dr. Palmer, sorry I had to cut real quick. We had to go back on air, but we were having a really great discussion on Facebook. So you're going to have to go back and watch that in between segment to get that information. We were talking about the vegan versus plant-based versus vegetarian versus, diets all over the world. And I do want you to repeat that last part about when it comes to juicing versus smoothies. Because there's, people that they only juice, or some people do smoothies because whatever reason. So, and I like both. I've done both. And so, can you touch on that? And then we're going to move on to some other topics.
And just a preface too, before I get into that, for mostly I try to promote a healthy diet overall. And so, when we look at individual goals, I don't want to say that juicing is inherently bad. It's just when we look at what our goal from juicing is. And so one of our challenges is processing. And so when we look at industrialized nations such as America and we compare cardiovascular risk to the rest of the world, one of the key indicators that's been found is the lack of the whole grain and fiber. And so
Okay.
it turns out where fiber is kind of a balance in our system, it helps us balance our sugars. And so it when we remove the fiber, becomes a problem. And so we take out the whole grain of our wheat or in our flour. Now we can make this smooth powder and make our pastries and our breads that are smooth and easily palatable. If we take the fruits and we juice them and we just get the juice only, well, we get a lot of sugar. We do get some vitamins and minerals which are valuable, but one of the kind of the missing links in our diet right now, and a lot of where a lot of the research is showing is that even when you look at fortified diets and how we have everything that like our breads have extra vitamins added because we removed the whole grain, and so now we're going to add those vitamins back into it, but it's turning out, well, that's not the same. Is that equivalence is we're putting those nutrients back in, and while vitamins and those nutrients are important, that missing link of that whole grain, that fiber, is being correlated with a lot of health issues.
Okay. So, fiber is key.
Fiber is
lower
good. Fiber is good.
calories, lower calories, and then monitoring your process versus whole and fresh or fresh frozen foods. Those are
Yeah,
some.
if I was to label one specific diet, I would um, place the Mediterranean diet as the it's the currently medically accepted healthy diet.
Okay. Alrighty. So we'll definitely have to have another conversation and break down diets and meal plans and things of that nature. Okay, so I want to transition a little and talk about as something you mentioned earlier. Your diet and nutrition plan should be based on your health, your current health condition. If you're dealing with some type of disease or disorder, and then let's talk about how biological factors play into that, environmental factors, and then also is it possible to keep a genetic marker dormant? Say grandma, great grandma, daddy had XYZ, you may be predestined, but can you keep that gene dormant by monitoring your overall diet and lifestyle?
I think that's a really excellent question. And if you start searching for that on the internet, you're going to discover that there's a lot of stuff where you got private companies doing that. You have researchers looking into that. And we're in an age of medicine where for a lot of different conditions and stuff that we're getting into this specific, self-specific medicine where we're trying to identify your genetic risk, your, which medicine works best for you, or which one works best based on your makeup. And right now, that's just not a universal available thing. So I mean, I can't just go out and say, I can test you in the clinic and say, well, what you're missing is quinoa or an orange or something, and so don't eat broccoli. And so it becomes a complicated answer. And there's definitely food intolerances. There's definitely um, foods that you may not realize that you don't process well. And sometimes mom didn't process well, or dad didn't process well. And those are kind of going from family to family member. And um, our diets are complex, and if you think about what you ate in your last meal, you there may have been so many just different ingredients in there, and you're like, well, I don't think the shrimp agreed with me. Well, it may not be the shrimp, it may be the spices that were on the shrimp. It may have been the sauce that had coconut milk in with the shrimp. It could have been the noodle. It could have been, something else you ate or drank or something else like that. So our diets are very tricky to identify specifically what things you may not be tolerating. And there's definitely allergy panels, that food allergy panels that exist. Um, and some people will order those pretty frequently and look into that. But it becomes this whole, well, what is it? Now, you asked a separate question there about, say, my genetics have a problem because of my family history, and I'm concerned about suppressing that, so that I don't do that. So if you look at a lot of like autoimmune diseases, most of those things require an environmental trigger.
Okay.
And so a popular term right now is inflammation. Okay.
Inflammation.
And I referenced earlier, sometimes people use words, and I'm like, well, what actually are you meaning by that word? And that's one of those ones too, when people come in and it's like, when they say I'm on a diet, well, it's like, I want to reduce inflammation in my body. I'm like, what do you actually mean by that? And so you can see it thrown out in Facebook or wherever we go and mingle and references and stuff. And so sometimes for me, I'm like, what actually are you meaning by inflammation? Um, and it's a complicated issue. And sometimes it's not from the science. When you look at inflammation in our body, there's different ways that inflammation presents itself. And from a diet area, from a nutrition side of things, I would promote it goes back again to the healthy diet. I think that that's why it's considered to be one of the healthier diets. It really goes back to fiber, and so fiber and those products that we consume with that. So you can think of the effects that fiber have, and then when you look at the plant-based diet, there's a lot of natural anti-inflammatories in there. And so things that I tend to promote are things that like oatmeal. It's a whole grain. It has beta glucan in it, which is an anti-inflammatory. That specific fiber is an anti-inflammatory. Polyphenols, those are found in blueberries, grapes, blackberries, and pretty much. And you can even see that, recently, uh, uh, that made notoriety. You can see it out there on the internet where Dr. Gupta was talking about brain development on a CNN thing, and his book come out, and he's basically saying eat more berries. And so, and that's basically what we're referencing here, is that there's a lot of healthy anti-inflammatory, antioxidants that are
Okay.
in there. And those, both of those, when we look at all those products, they actually are anti-inflammatories for the gut. And
Okay.
that's where that nature is, where that connection is being studied right now. And so they're looking at the effects of fiber and antioxidants and anti-inflammatories on the healthy gut flora, bacteria that normally live in our colon. I mentioned earlier
Okay.
it's a symbiotic relationship, and that's what I was referencing, is the fact that a lot of our health is
Is
dictated by what we eat, that those plant-based diets, and then what organisms are living in our colon that help us break them down.
okay. Since you brought up gut, the gut. Another thing that I love is kombucha, and I make my
Mhm.
own. And so let's talk about prebiotics and probiotics
Okay.
and how they contribute to helping your gut stay healthy. And then maybe also some facts and myths about that.
Okay. I have generalized responses to that, mainly because when I start exploring that, it's hard to find specifics, and a lot of these kinds of things we can see correlation, um, but that direct causation is unknown. So for kombucha, I actually have some in the house right now. Kombucha is a fermented drink, and they come in all kinds of different flavors and flares. And right now, there's it seems to be healthy to do it. There's a lot of benefits with those organisms from fermented beverages and foods. Sorry, alcohol doesn't necessarily count in as that same comparison. There's discussions with that. That's a separate discussion. But especially from fermented drinks, kombucha falls in there. Then you can get into things like sauerkraut. Um, as a fermented item. And culturally speaking, across the world, there's a lot of just different people, different places that use different kinds of fermentation. For me, growing up, sauerkraut was probably the number one on that. But I mean, how many times do I eat that? So but there is benefits to it. When we talk about prebiotics and probiotics, there's discussions about, some people feel like, hey, I just eat these prebiotic pills or probiotic pills, and then the gut acid's going to destroy it. There's interesting data that says otherwise sometimes, but from a standard, is there one specific one? I've seen advertisement says this one has the most colon, this the most of the best, and I haven't seen data that just says this is the best.
Okay.
Even when you look at dairy and yogurt from a Mediterranean side of things, you can eat some dairy, but you have to be mindful of just not eating too much high fat dairy. But I typically encourage the ones that have active cultures in it,
Okay.
and there's data that supports that. But when we look at the data on healthy gut flora, the healthy gut bacteria. There's bacteria that are associated with health. People who are healthy and don't have medical problems or physical ailments tend to have significantly higher diverse colonies of bacteria in their colon compared to people who are unhealthy or feel unwell or have medical problems um, they have significantly lower numbers of those bacteria. And there are few bacteria that are associated with poor health outcomes and few that are supported with good health outcomes. But the main clinical corollary with that is a diverse plant and vegetable fiber diet seems to support those higher colonies of healthy bacteria. And so when you start looking at, well, is one probiotic better than another, or should I be doing this prebiotic? I'm just going to be honest and say I don't know. Maybe one day we're going to have some sort of data that says no, you do this one. But right now, the clinical corollary is mostly the more healthy variety, rainbow plate of fruits and vegetables that we're eating in the day promotes a healthy diet and gut bacteria. The more fiber that the fiber that we're eating that's found in our in our diet, those whole grains are helping our gut bacteria and promoting health.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about then, we I don't know who they are and where they came up with these charts, but we've all seen the height versus weight chart. If you're this height and you should weigh this much and this age and this, it's like, okay, I don't know who y'all are, but anyway, let's talk about, is there, and I know again this is going to play into genetics, biology, everyone's body shape is different as well. So just because someone, you could take two people that weigh 150 pounds, but their body shape and the way their weight is distributed is totally different. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that. Is there an optimal weight per height? you know
So, um, I'll support your questioning here and your thoughts. I think that when we look at the BMI is what we have to go on. Um, does it fail some people? I would say yes. Personally, I would say
Okay.
yes, the BMI fails some people. I feel that if you weigh a lot and then you're now comparing your BMI to say after you lose 100 pounds or 50 pounds, I would argue that that BMI is not the same as of a BMI before you gain that weight. Meaning, so okay, I have a 22 BMI now, but I originally was a 30 BMI and now I'm down to a 22. Well, I don't think that 22 is the same as after you gain the weight versus before you gain the weight. Because I think things changed in your body.
Oh,
I have nothing to support that. That's just my own personal thoughts. Um, but when you look at body shape and you look at goals and expectations, there's a lot of data that just shows that when people start losing weight and changing their lifestyle, that risks go down just like losing 20 pounds.
okay.
Okay. And that they may still be obese, but losing 20 pounds changed health outcomes right then. And
Okay.
so you have to then look at, well, what's our goals and our expectations? And and sometimes that's just for me a personal reflection question. And I just ask my patients, I'm like, well, what are you wanting here? Are you wanting to be healthy? Is there a certain weight number that you're looking for? Or is there a certain way you want to look or how you feel? I know plenty of people who look amazing, but they're not healthy.
Okay.
Okay. And so sometimes we have to break down that number. And there's a lot of data and science out there that supports that, okay, say you weigh 250 pounds and you should be 140. Well, is 140 healthy for you at this point? And
Okay.
there's a lot of data that says no, going back to 140 is not healthy. And so those are individualized goals and concerns. And there's a lot of work involved as far as assessing where you're at, and it's a journey. You have to stop. It's like, okay, at 220, how do I look and how do I feel? Where am I going from here? Where's my fat? Okay. That centralized obesity, that lower abdomen weight is that's a poor um, risk uh, predictor. So you're
Okay.
at risk of having diabetes and cardiovascular disease with having that central obesity around your lower abdomen. Those are specifically ones that we want to fight. And definitely there's some genetics there, and there's people that have trouble losing that. But focusing on healthy diets is my recommendation.
Okay. And then looking at also body types, we know that certain cultures, and it's not just, Black people are heavier or wider in the hips and things. Across all cultures, you see variations. And
Hmm.
so for those individuals who, again, carry their body distributes fat differently than others, say the hips, the whatever area,
Right.
is there a are there different recommendations as far as nutrition and exercise for those individuals who carry their weight, their fat distribution other and differently than others?
For me, I usually take that as a personal approach.
Okay.
And that would just be where I just ask the person, okay, what's your goals and how do you feel about them? I get a wide range of responses. A lot of times also, for if it's a lady, a woman, I'll ask them, well, what does mama look like? Do you favor your mom or do you favor your dad? Does your mom have big legs, big thighs, or big belly, or and so sometimes the responses on those are different. Um, and then it becomes, again, where are you at right now? It's like, how can I promote healthy lifestyle? And it becomes where I know we're talking about nutrition, but it's like, are we exercising? Are we sleeping well? Where's our stress? And
Okay.
trying to tailor all these, why am I not having success or why do I look this way? I'm like, well, okay, we need to jumpstart our metabolism by doing some exercises. We need to exercise certain areas because this is where I'm putting on my fat in this location, and so we need to improve our core. We need to do leg exercises, or and so yeah, those become individual.
Okay. Look, I have so many more questions, and I know we won't get to them all like right now, but we're getting ready to come up on another break. But I do want to talk about in our last segment eating disorders, because we know this is something that has been we've seen across the centuries, that people fall into these pitfalls. You know, they fall into these places where, okay, this is not working, this is not working, or I feel some kind of way. There's a psychological component to how they feel about their bodies and their diet and this, that, and whatever. So I want to talk about that correlation, the psychological a correlation to nutrition. So we'll definitely get into that when we come back from break. But we're going to continue a short discussion on Facebook. So if you want to jump on and hear an off the cuff discussion, you can join us. But we will be back after these announcements with Dr. Palmer from NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine on the College of Arkansas, on the campus of Arkansas State University. We'll be right back. Okay, so as you're talking, my mind is always racing to all these different questions and things like, okay, because again, like I have lymphedema, and I went to see a doctor in Memphis once, and he told me I also have deal with lipoedema or lipedema. And so when I tell you trying to get it together has been like pushing a boulder uphill for me. And then sometimes I feel like some of the medical professionals that I've talked to, it's almost like they've given up on me, like, so it's frustrating at times trying to navigate these waters on your own. And I'm sure you encounter patients like that.
Yeah, it's difficult, and definitely, I think that observation for your physician or your medical support staff, that yes, it becomes frustrating, and sometimes as a physician, it's I can throw things out there, um, but can people do it? And it takes time and effort and persistence. It's a journey, and sometimes we're so focused on the finish line or a specific goal or outcome versus where are we at along the way. Okay, how are we feeling? How are we healthy? What is actually bothering me right now? What would I like to change? What would I like to do different? And even then, looking at what's really working. Okay, you know what, I really like this element of my lifestyle or diet, and I want to keep doing this versus I'm having a hard time incorporating this other element. And it's so complicated. And I wish that there was just like a simple short fix that I could tell people sometimes, but without, it's like, um, really, really diving into all the little elements, it just becomes challenging. And I mentioned it at the beginning that the hardest thing about changing is change, or the
Yes.
hardest thing about change is actually changing. And it becomes where we make a few of these little um modifications, and it's like, you know what, I worked out today and I ate a healthy breakfast, I'm going to celebrate with cake. And so
The
we
cheat
all
meals.
do it, we're all human, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's some sort of little bit like, I feel so much good about changing. Just thinking about it makes me want to, you know, celebrate by eating X. I'm going to eat ice cream to celebrate my thought about changing. Uh, and we do that because we're humans, and it becomes a situation where it's like, okay, we're doing, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good, but we got this bad thing over here that we need to address. And
Yeah.
um we you just have to kind of like, it becomes an individual journey. And hopefully you've got good positive support with those around you, whether it's family members, friends, even medical support staff, that can help you.
All right. We're going to pause for a minute because we're going to get ready to go back on air. Um, and this last segment is about 5 to 7 minutes long. Oops. Welcome back to Community Conversations on KLEK 102.5 FM with my special guest, Dr. Sam Palmer from NYIT on the campus of Arkansas State University. Today's been a great conversation, and this conversation could really be hours and hours long because there's so many things. Like, we just scratched the surface of what nutrition is, what diets are, what's best for individuals, which should be discussed with your doc. We'll talk about that at the end. I'll have you give some tips and pointers closer to the end. But real quickly, I want to get into the psychological aspect of dieting and trying to maintain or obtain some type of optimal or idealized body shape, size, health, whatever the case. So, and eating disorders. Go ahead, doctor.
So that's a very complex situation, and they do exist. And the first step is awareness and realization that this is or could be a problem. Um, it requires a integrated medical team, including counselors, psychologists, maybe even psychiatrists, nutritionists, dietitians, your primary care doctor. And so, regardless of if our thoughts about things, if they're interfering with our daily life, then that's a problem. And so it's not something that's solved easily. But the first step is discovery and realization. Hey, maybe this is a problem or this is a problem, and then seeking help. But they're not fixed quickly. But again, the first step is realization, and then getting it appropriate into the team of professionals that can help.
Okay, because some of the common things we hear about are anorexia and bulimia, and we have seen, or I've seen some data, and I'm sure you've seen quite a bit, the negative side effects of those eating
Mhm.
disorders, because some people feel like I just have to lose weight, I have to do this, and they go to extreme measures. And we didn't get into like diet pills and those other restrictions. So maybe about a minute or 2 minutes, can you sum up? I know that again, this is a complex area, but some of the pros, cons of pills and other things.
It really comes down to, and even kind of tying into your to our last little segment here about eating disorders is, I've mentioned before is that an individual what our goals are. Are we trying to lose weight shortly, or are we trying to change our lifestyle and have a better healthy lifestyle? And so our perceptions of our food and what we're doing matter. And so if we're just saying, hey, I need to eat a, have a pill and eat what I want, well, that may not necessarily be healthy. Do I need a pill to help me absorb less calories or change my um, desire for food? Well, that may, and it may not also be healthy. I tend to challenge, it's like one of our problems that we have with nutrition is that we need to change our perspective, our perception of the food we eat in our lifestyle. And kind of it, I'm sure everyone's heard the saying is if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got.
Okay.
Okay. And that goes to our food as well. It's like, we can't eat a bunch of bad things and expect different outcomes. And so I'm not saying that you can't ever enjoy a piece of cake or a small piece of cheesecake, but you can't just have your day and your week um, filled with all the bad things that you've eaten, because that's how we got here. And so when I have a discussion about diet pills, or even when we talk about eating disorders, that's usually a discussion too, of just what's our perception of our food and our perspective of how we're viewing a healthy lifestyle.
Okay. Another thing, should, and I know this will come with talking to a doctor or nutritionist. Um, like you said, our body processes foods differently. Everyone processes foods differently. Um, there are things like potatoes. I'm just gonna throw this out there. Potatoes. Some people can only eat a certain amount, or some people can't eat certain foods together.
Mhm.
That contributes to a whole like, again, this discussion is so complex
It is.
and it goes in so many directions. So before we go, talk about what are some key points Just kind of wrap up our overall discussion, because again, this is too much to discuss in 1 hour. What are some key points you want people to take away for today?
Goals should be individualized, and you should seek help from if there's medical conditions, you should seek help from your medical providers. Um, when we look at healthy diets, just in the general population, I would encourage, the Mediterranean diet is probably the premier healthy diet right now. I would encourage looking at that. Don't skimp on whole grains. They're important. Change your white rice to brown rice.
Okay.
Oatmeal for breakfast is a great idea to get the day going. Avoid added sugars, avoid added salt. Mostly, if it comes in a package, there may be some sort of problem there, but sometimes we have to eat packaged food and just based on our lifestyle. But change doesn't come easy. You have to continue to set reasonable goals, and realize what your expectations are here.
Okay. And when eating, and this is a whole other conversation. When eating out, um, just kind of being mindful. Um, if you could give a recommendation, um, how many times a week should we eat out or not?
Um, I'm not going to I don't have a specific how many times you should eat out. I think that there's a challenge, and so there's specific diets. So one of the examples of this is Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers is a great diet, but sometimes that people will have like my cheat day, and they'll say, "Hey, I'm going to make up for this tomorrow," and that just a lot of times just doesn't work out. I'm not saying that people can't do it, but again, it's like, okay, am I going to this restaurant and making a and healthy, informed decision, or I'm just throwing everything out and I'm going to eat what I want. Um, and that self um, uh, realization is what I'm saying. The self realization, that reflection of realizing, okay, what is my actual goal here? Am I choosing a lifestyle, or I'm just trying to lose a few pounds? And so,
Okay.
um, like I said, my standard of this is like I want to encourage a lifestyle. I want to encourage that overall this is your perception of how you're living and eating, and this is what healthy nutrition should be. And so it doesn't mean that you can't go out and have some good food sometimes, but again, it's like, um, you know, you can't have fried fish on Friday night, IHOP, and eat a full, 2,000 calories of pancakes. I love some IHOP pancakes, but you can't do that and then eat a big giant cheeseburger and fries and a Coke for the lunch, because we have a tendency of adding up every meal, and they're just way too many calories and too much salts or added sugars. And there's ways around it. There's healthy diets, and more menus are becoming more aware of that. Low sodium diets, vegetarian diets, lower calorie diets, and you're seeing those up on the menus now. And definitely, most of these places have their calories in their menu.
All right. So, key thing is talk to your medical provider. Do not try to do this on your own. I am speaking from experience. Do not do this on your own, and have an accountability partner as well. Someone who may not be a medical professional that you can check in, that can check in with you every now and then, and you bounce ideas off each other. But this is the end of our show. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Palmer. And I hope everyone has a great and blessed Wednesday. All right, so let me turn off the Facebook Live. Thank you so much, Doctor. This has been absolutely amazing. I truly enjoyed this conversation. I have so many thousand more questions. But thank you everyone for tuning into Facebook. If you have any questions, reach out to Dr. Palmer at NYIT, and hopefully he can guide you in the direction you need to go to get the information that you need. Have a great day, everybody. Okay. All right.